Hey everyone, and welcome to Hemp Processing and Technology. Today, we'll be showing you how to use an exhaust fan and a carbon filter in your indoor grow space. So let's start by breaking down what an exhaust fan does and why it's important. The purpose of an exhaust fan is to constantly suck out the air in your grow space, which in turn forces new air to enter the grow space through a specific intake hole or fan or just air vents. And while this brings a ton of benefits, such as controlling the temperature and humidity, an exhaust fan is extremely important for one main reason, and that is without new air circulating into the grow space, your plants won't have enough fresh CO2 to grow or possibly even survive. And while the concept of an exhaust fan sounds simple enough, installing one is even simpler. You can literally just put a fan blowing out of your grow space, and that's it. For some setups, that's all you need. Typically, you'll also want it as high as possible above your grow lights because since heat rises, having it high up will help remove the hottest air from the tent. And if you don't want the removed air to go back into the tent, you'll want to include a way for the air to cycle with a fresh air source. So for example, a ductless setup could be an exhaust fan blowing old air from the grow tent into a larger room and then installing a window fan in that room that cycles out the room air while cycling in outside air. While a typical duct setup will use ducting to direct the old air outside, forcing new air into the grow tent. But if we're introducing ducting, then it doesn't have to stop there. While almost all exhaust fan setups are located inside of the grow tent, you can pretty much put it anywhere you want where the ducting goes through, from the grow tent to the middle of the ducting to the end of the ducting, with similar results. Now let's move on to the carbon filter. A carbon filter is basically a bed of activated carbon held together in a metal casing that is used to remove contaminants and impurities by absorbing them, which in our case is through passing air. This completely cleans the air of all the smells that come from the grow space, which makes this a popular method used to deal with the smell of a plant. As for getting air through a carbon filter, here's where it gets interesting. A carbon filter, just like an exhaust fan, can be placed anywhere as long as it's connected to the exhaust fan, either at the ends or even in between the ducting. So while almost all setups have both the fan and carbon filter in the tent, pushing air out into the ducting, if for example your grow tent is too small to fit both a carbon filter and exhaust fan, you can easily place the carbon filter outside of the tent and have the air push into it, or the exhaust fan outside of the tent and leave the carbon filter inside of the tent, or even just put both outside of the tent. In fact, you can get an inline carbon filter, which I don't recommend because of how uncommon and expensive they are, and place the fan and filter both in the middle of your ducting. I know this sounds overwhelming in terms of options available, but generally speaking, if you can fit both the fan and carbon filter inside the grow space, then it makes the most sense to do so, since it keeps everything in one space and automatically conceals everything. I'd only recommend moving the exhaust fan and carbon filter outside if your grow space is too small to accommodate it, such as with a 2x2x4 feet grow tent. And don't forget that most high-intensity discharge lights, such as HPS and MH grow lights, will require airflow to pass through them as well for heat management. So the typical setup here when using these is to have the carbon filter at the end connected to the exhaust fan, which is then connected to the enclosed grow light hood and finally duct out of the grow space. Now as for how big of a fan you'll need for your grow space, While there is a science to how much air should be moved for the plants to be healthy, I'll give some generalizations first before going through specifics for those who don't care for the math. In general, if you have a 3 by 3 by 6 feet grow tent or smaller, you can get by with a typical 4-inch carbon filter and exhaust fan. If you have anything larger than that, then up to 5 by 5 by 6 feet, you can get by with a typical 6-inch carbon filter and exhaust fan. Anything larger than that, then you'll have to calculate it out yourself. And to calculate this, what you'll need to know is that when growing hemp, you generally want to exchange all of the air in the grow space once per minute. This is calculated in the exhaust fans through its CFM rating or cubic feet per minute rating. So for example, let's say you have a 3 by 3 by 6 grow tent setup. This means that you'll need to move 3 times 3 times 6, which is 54 cubic feet per minute. So all you'll need to do is just find a 54 CFM exhaust fan, right? Sure, if you're not planning on using any ducting or a carbon filter. But if you want to use either or, here's where it gets a little more dicey. Because adding ducting and or carbon filter makes the fan less efficient by making it harder to push and pull the air through. So you'll then need to multiply the total CFM by 2 if the air doesn't have too many hoops to jump through, and by 3 if there's a lot of ducting involved. So back to the example, instead of 54 CFM, with a lot of ducting and a carbon filter, suddenly that jumps up to 162 CFM. Also note that a carbon filter will have a CFM rating as well, and this basically states how much air can be pushed or pulled through a carbon filter per minute. So all you need to do is just make sure that this number is similar or higher to your exhaust fan CFM rating. Otherwise, it'll bring the exhaust fan down. Carbon filters also don't last forever, and when the active carbons in the filter fills up with captured impurities, the entire unit will need to be replaced. How often should you replace a carbon filter? It depends on your fan speed, on how often the fan is running, on your air quality. It could last a year, or it could last 3 years. Luckily, I'm going to share with you the one weird trick those cannabis corporate fat cats don't want you to know about. Just smell the air coming out of the exhaust. Or better yet, get somebody you trust to smell it, since if you have a grow space, you might be used to the smell. If it's not removing the hemp smell from the air, then it's time to replace it. Finally, a couple of tips and tricks. If you just need to scrub the air of a space, for example, if you're trying to remove the smell of your plants as they're drying in a closet, you can actually just run the carbon filter and exhaust fan in the closet without any ducting and have the air blow right back into the closet. This will constantly scrub the air of that space and nothing else. Also, most if not all carbon filters should come with an exterior dust filter. This is extremely important in blocking out large dust particles from clogging up your carbon filter and lowering its life expectancy. The trick here is that if you're pushing air through the carbon filter instead of pulling it in, you shouldn't install the air filter on the outside, and you should actually put the dust filter inside the interior walls of the carbon filter. Just be sure that no matter if it's outside or inside, to wash off the collected dust particles every 6 months or so, as the dust accumulation could prevent the carbon filter from taking in air if it's not cleaned periodically. And that's it.